Well, this is a fun day in a lot of ways for us. I'm going to invite Dave Mohr to come on up. Come on, give it up. Dave, you're looking real good today, by the way. I like your outfit.
Well, when we talked earlier this morning about wearing the same shirt.
We did not, but he just has great taste, that's all. And you will know that I only have 3 shirts, and this is one of them. So there weren't many options. Dave has been a pastor at many different places, but he was a pastor from 2003 to 2013 here at Summit Drive. And so we worked together for 7 great years before him and his wife Kim moved to Calgary. I hear you were praying specifically to move to Calgary, Kim. She was like, anywhere but Calgary, Lord. And they ended up there for 10 years. But we're really excited. I actually got to be a part of the search committee for finding a new BC Executive Minister last year. And Dave's name came across our desk, and he did the things. And now he is overseeing, is overseeing the right word?
I'm his boss.
Basically, yeah. Actually, they're my boss. But
yeah, that's true.
He's getting used to the Baptist polity again. He was in an alliance setting where he would have been the boss. But anyways, yeah, they're my boss, but he's like serving us. He's come underneath, all the way underneath to serve us. And it's a wonderful thing to have you guys here. Yeah, and he's going to be preaching today. Can we just give a warm welcome again to Dave and to Kim?
Thanks, Dave. It truly is a joy to be with you. I was praying for you all this morning, and as I was praying, I found myself getting a little emotional, if I'm honest, because I was just so grateful for what I see here. All praise be to God. Thank you, God, for the blessing that is Summit Drive Church and the people which are Summit Drive Church. What an amazing privilege to be here. And so we had a great time last night. I've taken over a new role, as Pastor Dave mentioned, as called the Executive Minister of the British Columbia Association of Churches. And so our church is spread all the way from northern BC and Terrace to actually a little bit into Washington State even. And so I have this role, which I'm just discovering what it is actually, to be honest, but I'm loving it. I'll tell you what my goal is. It's really simple. As I oversee these churches, I would like to see us plant more churches like this. I would like to see the entire province of British Columbia be moved closer to Jesus. Wouldn't that be incredible? If something like this started a wave across this province, and we planted more churches, and we saw Jesus' name honored everywhere. What an amazing thing. I had a great night last night with many of your staff, not quite all of them. Got to meet Trish, who's about to be united in holy matrimony. I didn't write it down either, Dave. But no, really, we've just been having a great time being here, and it is such a joy to be here. I'll give you a snapshot for those of you who know me or know us, our family. We were here during some very formative years for us in our ministry, my family and I. Our kids really grew up at Summit Drive in Kamloops. And so they have since grown up even more. My oldest is in Calgary. He's a paramedic. My middle son, and he's married with 1 child. My middle son is a youth pastor in Vernon, BC, and he has married with 1 son. My first son has a daughter. Yeah. You're really getting to know me well as I talk here, ramble on. And then my daughter is, she's 22, and she is living at home and just finished school and contemplating whether she's going to eventually move with us to BC, because we still live in Calgary at the moment as we find a permanent place to live in BC. And I will tell you, for those of you who are thinking, I do have grandkids. I have 2, a granddaughter and a grandson. And if I had known how fantastic it was, I would have started having grandkids a long time ago. It is absolutely the best thing you could ever... Anybody here agree with me? Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's nothing like it. I wonder... Anyway, the whole kid thing, it was worth it. I'm telling you, it was worth it. Okay? Well, I want to bring you greetings from all the other churches in our association. I've been visiting all of them over the last 8 or 9 months, and I plan to do it over the next year or so till I get a chance to visit the rest of them. But again, a privilege to be with you today. If you have a Bible or if you're using the app or whatever it is you're going to use, I'm going to invite you to turn to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. We're going to look at the first couple of verses of Romans chapter 12. Now, if you've been a follower of Jesus for a long time, you know for a fact that these verses have been through your head. People have talked about them. People like me have preached about them many, many times. You've heard them a lot. But we're going to look at them maybe from a different angle. We're going to see exactly what was it really, real life, practical, meat and potatoes. What did Paul want for us in Romans chapter 12? So, Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Now you notice at the very beginning, the very top of chapter 12, our English translations have said the word therefore. Whenever you see the word therefore in a passage of Scripture, you ask yourself this question: what is it there for? He's saying, the stuff that I've written in the first 11 chapters of Romans, I'm in chapter 12 now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call you to that kind of life, the first 11 chapters. And it's a life, he wants to say, that's built on something lasting. It doesn't come out of nowhere. That's the deal. It's rooted in something. And what's it rooted in? He gives us the answer. He says it's rooted in God's mercy. God's mercy. It's plural. God's mercy. It perfectly sums up the truth of God and His relationship with us through Jesus in chapters 1 through 11. So listen again with that in mind. Listen again. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. So as we begin, despite the risk of oversimplifying these incredible words of this incredible text, let me attempt to give you an 8-word summary of the first 2 verses. Your entire life should be a living sacrifice. Sound like a big deal? It is. Sound easy? Nope. What do we need to do? If I'm going to live a life that is completely and constantly sacrificing myself. You know, if you ask almost anyone what they think of religion, when you say the word religion, they'll say something like this. They'll say a belief system, or it's a particular way of living. And they wouldn't be actually that far off. What it means, what they're saying is you practice certain practices, or you behave in certain ways because of what you believe. But in the ancient world that Paul was writing to in this particular context, religion was thought more in terms of sacrifice. Religion was about trying to make things right. And you did that, he would say, by offering a sacrifice. You do the right thing to please the right God or the right gods, as it were, and do it in the right way. And it's really no different, actually, than what all religions are after. They're after religious behavior for the purpose of kind of wiping my slate clean, right? See, in that case, if making a sacrifice is simply religious behavior, then religion, as defined there, would be kind of hollow. It would be empty. As Paul talks about in the first half of Romans, that's what an empty religion does, but it's not what Jesus was about. You don't have to offer sacrifices to make up for your sins anymore. Jesus did it once for all. Final, over, done. You see, if a quick sacrifice just wiped my slate clean, what's my motivation? To avoid the bad decision the next time? It just becomes kind of an abuse of what God intended with the old system of sacrifice. What it kind of comes down to is this: there's sacrifice without the right attitude. It's just a hollow gesture based on an action rather than the heart. So in view of all that God has done, His mercy, we offer a sacrifice. but it's just going to be a different kind of sacrifice than at first glance. You see, the sacrifice is going to be you and me, a living one. It's a living sacrifice that flows out of a sincere heart. Now, notice I didn't say it flows out of what we say, flows out of what we do, or even how we say or how we do it. Paul wants us to know this is the thing that pleases God. Do you get that? See, if you give something away that you have no stake in or you have no connection to, it doesn't cost you anything, it's actually not really a sacrifice. At best, it's convenient, but it's impersonal. It's the same as an act of sacrifice that comes from an insincere heart. The one thing that isn't is worship. A few weeks ago, Pastor Dave gave you a definition of worship. It went something like this: all of me for all of him. That's an important distinctive of what true worship actually looks like. And it's very much what Romans 12 is telling us today. Now, there's something really significant in verse 1. Before Paul describes a life of sacrifice as being merciful to other people, and the rest of chapter 12 is filled with it, by the way. Before that, though, he describes it as worship. See, being a follower of Jesus is more than being merciful, more than about being just merciful to people. It has everything to do with being worshipful to God. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. He said, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. In other words, in view of God's mercy, your sincere sacrifice from here is offered to him. Before we focus all our energy on being merciful to other people, what we do is we give ourselves away completely and wholly in worship to God. A life of sacrifice is first and foremost a response to God in worship. Oh, this is big. This is big. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that a lot of us miss this a lot of the time. If you're a follower of Jesus, then this is actually specifically for you. We can never let ourselves drift into mere social agenda. And I say the word mere in social agenda carefully because if God's left out, our mercy will be just social agenda, which, if you're not a follower of Jesus yet, I would tell you keep doing it, go all the way, run hard, serve others, do your best. But it can be so much more. See, it's a beautiful thing for anybody to give the hungry something to eat. But how much more beautiful knowing that God decided they were worthy of his mercy even before you decided to be merciful to them. See, Jesus' followers show mercy out of the value they see in others because of the value that God actually gave them long before you did. Put it this way, the things we do, the sacrifices we make that flow out of a sincere heart, those sacrifices are an expression of actually God's worth. That's why Summit Drive serves the people of Kamloops the way they do. That's why you'll hold an event on Halloween and get 400 or 500 people and kids running up onto this property and mingling with you. But see, if all the ways we sacrifice our time and our energy, our resources, if they're not an act of worship first, then in the end, we actually may not have even been really merciful. We serve not so we can be seen, but so others can see Jesus. The defining characteristic of a Jesus follower is a life of worship so that it can be merciful. Did you get that? The defining characteristic of a Jesus follower is a life of worship so that it actually can be merciful. If we're not worshiping in our behavior, that is, if God's mercies to us in the gift of Jesus, if they don't go hand in hand with our behavior, then we're actually not giving people what they really need the most. You see, the mercy of God is the relentless pursuit of his people, both when they need him and when they think they don't. It's what followers of Jesus have experienced before they even started to follow him. That's God's mercy. It's inspiring. It's motivating. It drives us to live a life where sacrifice now becomes an every single day act of worship. It's so much more than what we do on a weekend in church service. It's not about that one great song that just moved me into just the right worship mood. It's more than a one-sentence prayer in the morning or at night with the kids before you go to bed or before you grab a bite to eat. See, a living sacrifice, says Paul, it carries this posture throughout the day that is actually tuned right in to the same things that God is. It's more than a moment. It's more than a song. It's more than a prayer. It's who we are all the time. There's been times in my life when I've said to God, I don't know if I can. It's too hard. God, is too distracting. So many other things going on in my world right now. Or this is going to, I don't have time, Lord. This is going to take too long. You ever said anything like that to God? Maybe it's that time when you were wrestling through that issue. You know that issue that you know, only you know, that you couldn't seem to get a handle on. You couldn't seem to get victory over, and you said to God, I can't. Or maybe it was just following through with doing the right thing. You knew you were supposed to do it, but you struggled to go all the way, and so you said to God, I can't. See, it can be so hard, almost impossible. Where, God, every moment of every day, really? You don't know what my work life is like, God. My boss, impossible, so hard to figure out, so hard to please. God, you have no idea. Living with my family, are you kidding? It's mayhem, God. Have you been there? I think you've seen it. Impossible. But God, my friends, you have no idea how persuasive they can be. It's so tough. They don't get what I stand for, so God, I just can't. I've learned something about myself that may be true of you as well. It's usually not a case of I can't, as much as it is I won't. Some of us don't even get to the point of saying, God, I won't, because before that we decide it's not even worth trying. See, if we cut right to the heart of the problem, what we discover is the heart is actually the problem. When we let other things take a priority over God, those things become more important to us here than anywhere else in any other way. Remember the first commandment of the Big Ten? Jesus addressed this regularly throughout his ministry on earth, specifically when it came to how we act in the everyday kind of stuff. Jesus addressed that all the time. Mark 7:21, he said, out of man's hearts. He was really specific. And then he goes on to say, there comes all sorts of stuff. You see, in those moments, we have a choice. We have a choice to live moment by moment, day by day. Trying to let our entire life be an act of worship. Now let me get practical, really practical just for a moment. Parents, what would your relationship with your kids look like if when you were with them, when you were talking with them, you did that as an act of worship to honor God? Students, hey, do you think homework would be nearly as tough if it was done as a way to say, God, I'm just going to give it my best shot? Or how about conflict in your relationships? Would those be easier or harder if you realigned how you talked, the words you said? If you determined that the actual words, the words you used, would be a way to honor God? See, every single part of our day can be an act of worship that pours out of a sincere heart. The struggle can be immense, but if there's one thing that life teaches, when we don't worship and honor God in all that we do, we will worship something or someone else. And despite that, there's only one who's worthy of our worship. That's what a life of sacrifice is about. It's about relinquishing my desire to do my own thing and then present that as an offering to God. That's the living sacrifice. Now, verse 2 of Romans 12 is one of the most quoted verses in the entire Bible. But we really should never read verse 2 of chapter 12 without reading verse 1 first, because verse 1 is all about the how. So verse 1, let me just read it again. I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Now, verse 2. This is how I want you to do it, Paul would say. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's the how we do verse 1. Now, the word conform is a really important one here. It's the word that we get our English word for scheme from. And we all know what a scheme is, right? It's all about being perceived in a certain way. We plan it, we strategize. We want to change the look on the outside, but we don't have to worry so much about what's really going on inside, right? It also means fashioned. You put those two words together, and what Paul is saying is this. Don't allow yourself to adopt what looks good to the world, which is all being focused on the outside stuff. There was a few years ago that I saw a commercial. I think I might have been here in Kamloops at the time. And I was having a hard time sleeping. And so I woke up in the middle of the night, and I turned on an infomercial. And I saw these. Have you ever used these things before? They're really hard. I actually determined the guy who was trying to sell these things to me on TV, man, he was buff. And I thought, that's me. That is going to be me. And he said, if I use these religiously, I think he might even use that word, for just a few minutes a day for the next, 25 years, I would probably do really well. And so I did. I used them diligently. I'm telling you, I probably used them 3 or 4 times. And I got to tell you, they are incredibly hard to use. I have found a different use for them, though, interestingly enough. When you're sitting on the couch at night, if you sit them between the couch cushions and you set a plate of nachos, some of you are judging me right now, and I'm just going to tell you right now, I know you've got that treadmill stashed in your closet. And some of you haven't pulled out that Suzanne Stummer's Thigh Master for years. See, here's the problem I think that so many of us deal with. We spend so much time working on the outside stuff, the external stuff, conforming, really, to what everybody else thinks is important. Students, you get caught up trying to keep up? Nick, enough TikTok followers? Likes? Follows? Maybe you're a young mom, you feel pressure to fit in and do all the right things that the same other young moms are doing. See, the problem is thinking that I want people to see me this way when it really only matters that God sees me His way. See, woven throughout the first 11 chapters of Romans, Paul is telling each of us about God's mercies. And he's clarifying not only who He is, but listen, this is the most important part. He's clarifying who we are because of Him. Listen to some of those incredible truths earlier on in Romans. Romans 3:23 says it doesn't matter how good you are at sacrificing to other people, doing good things. It says you'll never be good enough. All have sinned. Remember this? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. It says in Romans 5:8 that God's mercy showed us how much He loved us. He loved us that much. And it says in verse 8, God showed His great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners? Like before I did anything? Yeah. God sent His Son for me then. See, God's mercies are the things that make me who I am. Paul is saying we're not defined by our performance. Your talents, gifts, all those sweet skills that you developed over the years, they're all good. But God's kindness, God's mercy, those are it. Those are the things that make you who you are. Who I am isn't built on what is done by me. It's built on what Jesus has done in me and now through me. Who I am is not built on anything I do or cannot do. It's not built on anything I say or cannot say. Anything I've done or have not done. It's only in what He's done and what He continues to do. See, here's why I think it's really dangerous for us to define ourselves by anything other than the mercies and grace of God. And the first reason is really, really practical. When all those things that we're holding on to disappear, and they always do, we're left with nothing. And suddenly we're forced to redefine ourselves by the next thing, whatever the next thing is. You and I see this all the time, every day in our world right now. The desire to define ourselves by the next thing. We're searching for that. But let me tell you the other reason that it's really dangerous. And I think it's really the only reason we need to be aware of. When we define ourselves by anything other than Jesus, we end up holding on to those things so tightly that it becomes incredibly hard to let them go. See, living the kind of sacrificial life that God asks is impossible when we're more worried about conforming the outside than we are transforming the in. We said earlier that the words for scheme and fashion, they came from that same word, old word for conform. You know what another English equivalent for transform is that Paul uses here? Metamorphosis. That's that process of change that starts on the inside. See, a life of sacrifice is marked by transformation. Where? On the inside. Now, an interesting fact about transformation. While it starts inside, it always shows up outside. See, Paul, when he's writing these to us as he was writing to them then, he's brilliantly showing us that a life of sacrifice, it flows out of a sincere heart. He's brilliantly showing us that it is an everyday act of worship. He's brilliantly showing us it doesn't conform to what just looks good on the outside, but is actually transformed on the in. The transformation is the result of everything else, Paul would say, that preceded it. It's about what God has done for you and I in the past, but now, and this is what he really wants us to know, it's about what he continues to do now in you and I. New Living Translation says this way: let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Don't let that first word of that verse in the New Living slip by you. Let. We don't need to spend a lot of time going over this, the opposite of letting God transform you. It's as simple as saying, don't let God transform you. I think Eugene Peterson says it this way in the Message. He says, let God bring the best out of you. Oh, that sounds appealing, doesn't it? This is a big part of our role in the process of transformation. We decide to let God transform us into something new. It's actually what it all comes down to. Letting God transform you and change how you think. You know, when I was growing up, I have just the greatest of memories of my dad. We had a good relationship growing up. He passed away a number of years ago. But one thing I remember about my dad was, of the many things I remember about my dad, is how strong he was. Maybe some of you have similar memories. I remember as just a little guy, I'd run out into the field, and during break, he always had to have coffee during a break. And his break was at 10 o'clock. If he started at 7 in the morning on the fields, he'd work, and break was at 10, and then lunch was at 12, that kind of thing. I would run out and give him his coffee. And it'd be 30, 32, 35 degrees out in the field, and he'd sit there, and I remember as this little guy watching him, he'd open up that thermos, pour steaming, hot cup of coffee. And I, as a little guy, would watch him. He was so strong, he drank that hot coffee in that 32-degree weather. Oh, my dad was so strong. I remember when he got cancer in his 60s. And the doctor said, you probably only got about, really this much time to live. And my dad said, I don't think so. And so he decided he was going to live this long. And he did. I just remember thinking that whole time, oh, my dad was so strong. Everything about my dad, I remember that. But you know what else I remember? My dad, every morning and every night, I could see him. I'd walk by his room or hear him through the door on his knees praying, putting himself in submission to the God who saved him, putting himself in a posture of humility to say, God, I'd like you to transform me. My dad always had this posture before God. I'll never forget that. Our text in Romans is really challenging. What are my priorities? How do those priorities align with God's priorities? You know what I think it comes down to? Our posture. See, I believe a life of sacrifice is dependent on our posture. If you're a follower of Jesus, your life should be about something different. What drives you? What motivates you? What guides you? What inspires you? What transforms you? You know, at the end of the service here, as you leave, the ushers are going to have a card for you. It's about this big. I don't have one on me right now. It's about this big. And on it is a printout of a prayer from a Richard Foster book. And the prayer is called a prayer of relinquishment. And what that is it's a tough prayer. I'm not going to kid you. We're going to pray it here together in a moment or two. It's a tough prayer because it really challenges all my predispositions of how or who I am. And it says, God, why don't you just take that? I'm going to ask at the end, you just take one of those with you. And I'm going to ask if you have the courage to take that, stick it on your fridge or your mirror or your bedside table. And would you pray that twice a day? Make that a part of your daily liturgy. Make that a part of your routine as you submit yourself to the leadership of God in your life. Let's read through it. And would you just, it'll be on the screens, I think, and if you just pray it along with me, and we'll close. Today, O Lord, I yield myself to you. May your will be my delight today. May your way have perfect sway in me. May your love be the pattern of my living. I surrender to you my hopes, my dreams, my ambitions. Do with them what you will, when you will, as you will. I place into your loving care my family, my friends, my future. Care for them with a care that I can never give. I release into your hands my need to control, my craving for status, my fear of obscurity. Eradicate the evil, purify the good, and establish your kingdom on earth. For Jesus' sake, amen.